Laika Age Through Blood is a 20-hour Motorvania, as nicknamed by the developers, where you play as a coyote riding around a wasteland on a motorbike, performing acrobatic feats and massacring an army of militarized birds. It's a game that has many unique hooks, but unfortunately doesn't totally nail any one aspect of its experience. The intention of this video is to break the game down Clint Eastwood style, with 3 sections focused on what the game does well, what it doesn't do well, and the one thing that it does horribly. There will be some overlap between these sections, however, because the quality and impressions made by the game's experience and its mechanics can fluctuate so wildly that often many of Laika's good parts are also its bad parts. This video is not meant as a review of Laika, but rather a deeper examination, so be aware that I spoil some of the surprises that the game has to offer, including parts of the ending. If the footage playing in the background and/or the concept of a motorbike Souls-like seems like something you might enjoy, then perhaps exit the video for now and play Laika for yourself. This video will still be here and you can return to it later after you've formed your own opinions. If you're still unsure and would like to hear more about the game's story, mechanics, and some of the other features that it does well, know that you'll be safe for another couple minutes. I'll provide another spoiler warning later in the video as an additional off-ramp for those that decide then that they would like to play the game first. If you're looking for my absolute bare-bones thoughts, they're these. I liked Laika but didn't love it. I'd give it a 7 out of 10 and would recommend it to fans of the Souls-like genre as well as anyone who enjoys seeing creative new ideas in video games. Because that's what I'll personally remember the most about Laika, its creativity. My hope is that this will be the foundation for a new genre of Souls-like games. From the fade-in of the game's menu with the heavy, ominous Western thumping music, I expected this to be a violent and brutal journey that I was embarking on. Laika Aged Through Blood's greatest strength is in its atmosphere and presentation. Riding through former military bases, toxic waste dumps, and the rusted husks of Navy vessels was not only visually interesting, but when combined with the presentation of how these locations fit into a world where a fascist bird society is hunting down other species, the environments became something greater. Learning that an old lighthouse was being used by the birds as their communication center, or that the nuclear warhead in the background of one of the maps was actually part of the original first strike by the birds, helped build a setting that felt storied and believable, despite it also being a world where pelicans were firing missiles. The game has an interesting feedback loop where the violence seen in the world reinforces the atmosphere, which in turn further reinforces the violence. The horrors of the wasteland, especially the grotesque monstrosities you fight as bosses, feel like they could only work in this setting, and yet never felt like they were just cheap shock value. The story itself is mostly good. You play as Laika, an immortal resident of a small community of animals hidden away from the birds. Your immortality is tied to a family curse that can pass from mother to daughter once the child has reached puberty. As Laika, both your mother Maya, who's the previous vessel for the immortality curse, as well as Puppy, your daughter and potential future vessel, play a part in the story. In fact, it's these 3 characters that were the meat of the story for me, and I wished even more time had been spent with them. When a daughter in the lineage begins to go through puberty, they develop a fever which either passes the curse on, rendering their mother mortal and themselves immortal, or it just outright kills them. The family curse is the topic for most of the game's best character moments, and through it the topics of grief, responsibility, resentment, as well as many others are explored. In many ways, the game utilizes ideas and themes found in what I consider the best piece of post-apocalyptic fiction, Cormac McCarthy's The Road. It doesn't have anywhere near the quality in its portrayal of these themes or in its writing, but for Laika to even be mentioned in the same sentence as The Road is quite an achievement. Before delving deeper into this comparison, I'm going to offer that promised second spoiler warning. If anything I've said so far intrigues you, then please pause the video and go play this game. I'd request that you come back to this video later to hear my thoughts, and just throwing this out there, but perhaps you subscribe if you're not already so you can easily find the channel and video again, but I'll leave that up to you. If you haven't read The Road, I'm not going to spoil it here because you should just read it. It's about a father and son who are traveling across a horrifying wasteland after an apocalyptic event has occurred. The father has the difficult task of trying to prepare his young son for this new, violent world, and throughout their journey they are presented many opportunities for a wide variety of lessons. These typically end with the further loss of the boy's innocence, however, that itself is presented as a problem. How do you prepare somebody for the harsh realities of the world without turning them into the harsh realities of the world? How do you avoid both naivety and cynicism? Again, it's a wonderful book. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. Laika attempts with varying degrees of success to drink from this same well. The wasteland setting, the violence, a parent and their child, wanting that child to still be able to be a kid, but questioning whether that is realistic or not in such a world. It's very The Road-esque. The majority of Laika is spent traveling to specific regions in order to destroy important parts of the Bird Empire. Their communication array, religious center, mining operations, and their floating city. Through these missions, several side characters are introduced, but like the side characters in The Road, they aren't really characters themselves. They serve to teach a lesson before being promptly killed off or never seen again. One of these in the game is done quite well, a mouse character who is forced into helping take down the bird's religious center. After Laika kills the regime's Pope figure, a giant mutated chicken, and destroys the center, we see that the mouse character has taken her own life rather than live with what she helped do. Her death brings the question of whether the character's actions can be justified, something that Laika herself questions by the end, as their attacks only further anger the birds and increase their violence. Deservedly so, because Laika herself is brutal, earning the nickname the Grim Biker within the bird society. This leads to her eventual death in the game's finale, as she assaults the bird's floating city in order to stop the leaders from dropping a second nuclear warhead on the wasteland. She is finally killed because this event occurs as her daughter Puppy is going through the tail end of the puberty fever, which once it passes renders Laika mortal again. With Laika gone, Puppy, now carrying the curse, will likely be trained by her grandmother Maya in order to serve in the same role, but the game ends before this is confirmed. It leaves you with lingering questions about how Puppy will be taught about the curse, given how much her mother Laika hated it and how manipulative her grandmother is about it. It's a simple story that leaves you with things to think about afterwards, rather than questions that it has no intention of answering. The concept of Laika's immortality is also tied directly into the gameplay and is how the game becomes a Souls-like. As the only immortal resident of the community, Laika serves as courier, scavenger, and most importantly, the protector. Players traverse the wasteland and wage a one-woman war against the fascist Bird Empire. As you've probably been able to tell from the footage that's been playing, Laika, aged through blood, takes the physics-based motorbike movement from a game like the Trials series and pairs it with a 2D Souls Metroidvania style of game like, say, Hollow Knight. Death respawns you at your last activated gravesite, as well as causes you to leave behind a collectible sack with half of your currency. Environments become progressively more dangerous with a larger number of birds as well as new types. You are meant to die many times. The 2D nature of the game in combination with the speed of the motorbike promotes you quickly being thrust into situations you didn't know were there because they were off screen. This can be immensely satisfying when you somehow survive an ambush you weren't prepared for. Hitting that last feathered fascist with your final bullet, somehow managing to kill all of the enemies, not get yourself shot, and land right side up. Because that kills you too, by the way, if you hit the ground upside down or off balance. What makes these combat encounters unique is the reloading mechanic, which requires you to perform a flip in the air in order to reload your currently equipped firearm. This is both a good thing and a bad thing. The good is that many of the game's guns have small magazines, and many of the encounters have large numbers of enemies, meaning you will often need to reload during an encounter. Performing a flip with enemies around opens you up to different angles to be shot yourself, as well as landing in a way that kills you. Trying to reload, aim, shoot, deflect incoming bullets, and land is a lot to keep track of, and when executed well, it feels terrific. And that's the good: the world building, the main characters and story, the core of the combat. However, I said that many of the good things about Laika also double as bad things, so let's work through these again in reverse. The combat in Laika has several problems that are all tied together. Largest among them is the reloading mechanic I just spoke about. While this mechanic in theory works quite well and it feels great when performed as intended, it also constantly interrupts the gameplay. Performing a flip is the only way to reload your weapon, so even if you only use half of your magazine during an encounter, you will likely feel compelled to find the nearest ramp, even if it means backtracking, just to quickly do a flip and replenish your ammo. This might not seem like a big deal, but for a game that is built around fast movement and combat encounters, to need to frequently slow down or backtrack in order to reload is frankly a mind-boggling design decision. This is further multiplied because each of your guns in your inventory needs to be reloaded separately, meaning it can take up to 4 flips just to reset and be ready to proceed. For me, this also meant I would approach combat encounters slowly and pick birds off from the fringes, then backtrack, reload my weapons, and repeat. By the end, when encounters are at their most complex, I ended up not playing the game how it was intended. And this likely sounds like a me problem, and perhaps it is. The obvious question is, why not just hit the gas, barrel into the encounters, and die as intended? Well, because the game's Souls-like mechanics is why. When you die, you respawn, as do enemies, and you leave behind half of your currency. This is standard for Souls style of games, but it's different here because by default you get killed in one hit, whether that is from an enemy's bullet or the physics of the motorbike. For many other games within the genre, it's about resource management. Dying and resetting allows for learning how to move through encounters more efficiently in order to get to new encounters with more resources, which creates a higher chance of being successful. In Laika, resetting at a former checkpoint can't do this because all of the enemies die in one hit themselves, meaning there's no patterns to learn and that you'll likely end up in the exact same situation ammo-wise at the end of an encounter, no matter how many times you've gone through it. A simple fix to this would be to have it so your weapons slowly reloaded when outside of combat naturally, maybe at a rate of 1 bullet per second. This would keep the best aspects of the reloading mechanic, being required to flip during intense combat encounters in order to reload, while also curbing the slowing down of the gameplay that is currently happening due to the desire to fully reload for the next encounter. This change would actually incentivize continuing to push forward because you wouldn't feel completely defenseless. Now, additionally, the mechanics of losing half your currency seems out of place and like it's only here because it's a Souls-like staple. Mini-games utilize this type of death mechanic as a way to create tension and incentivize learning. Rushing gets you killed, which means potential loss of resources you've gathered. This could be justified here in Laika if there were actually interesting equipment or upgrades to buy, but there aren't. It's mostly buying consumable cooking ingredients or side quest related items. There are weapon upgrades which are significant, but you cannot buy them with currency alone, as they also require rare crafting materials found throughout different regions of the map. The other part of the gameplay, the exploration, also isn't great. The game has tons of side quests to complete for the various NPCs around the village and world, but almost all of them were dull and ultimately not worth my time. They were the definition of filler, and what made it worse is that there are too few checkpoints in the game to fast travel to, which meant retreading the same areas over and over. It becomes incredibly tedious. Talk to a villager, find the closest shrine to warp to, then further drive to the location because the quest items are never actually in the fast travel regions. Talk to a traveling merchant or gas station clerk or wanderer, purchase what you need, then ride back to the shrine to teleport. As I'm writing this, I'm actually struggling to remember most of the side quests in the game, and I did almost every single one. One that does stick in my mind is driving to a gas station to purchase tampons for a girl in the village, and it only sticks in my mind because I couldn't believe my time was being spent doing that. The only two possible exceptions to the poor quality were the multi-staged quest to reunite the town's musicians, which I'm not actually sure was worth my time, and then the one to hunt down the bird that killed your daughter's best friend. That second one was good and relevant to the main characters and story. In fact, I'm surprised it wasn't a part of the main story. Tracking down the fearsome soldier named Kid Gutter, only to learn that he's a kid himself, scared and regretful of his actions, was good, and I liked that it gave you the choice at the end of whether or not to still kill him, given the additional context. For the reuniting the band questline, I'm more mixed. The 6 individual quest lines were still tedious and followed the same formula I just described, but I at least got a bit of satisfaction seeing the musicians all together at the end. However, this is a missed opportunity itself. Through the quests, you learn that the band originally split because their lead vocalist left to join and live under the birds. As part of the main narrative, you actually go undercover and locate her within their city. It's a cool moment, but one that doesn't narratively make sense, and there's a chance players get there without even completing the band quests and understanding the significance of the singer towards that storyline. What would have made more sense would be having the interactions with the singer as the culmination of that band side quest, and to make the 6 fetch quests actually lead to something substantial. Instead, it just felt tedious because of all the backtracking. Mini Metroidvanias are able to sidestep the tedium of backtracking through the same levels because your toolkit continues to expand. New areas are reachable, and new knowledge or abilities reveal hidden secrets. Unfortunately, Laika has none of this. Your toolkit doesn't expand meaningfully. A shotgun that has slight recoil, a rope tow, and a nitrous oxide boost acquired late in the game are it. The shotgun allows for shooting open some barricades as well as small hops, but is irrelevant once you get the boost. The rope tow was used so minimally that it seems like a late addition during development, or perhaps a victim of cut content that better utilized it. Because of these design decisions, the world is only minimally connected and doesn't really expand due to your own abilities or upgrades. You could say that it's misleading then to say that Laika is a Metroidvania or Motorvania as the developers say, because it really isn't. It shares almost none of the characteristics of the genre. As for the story, as I've stated, I think it's good. However, there is one part of it that is so poorly designed that it isn't just bad, it's awful, and at points had me considering quitting the game. The single worst part of Laika Aged Through Blood are its bosses. There are 6 in total, and while every single one visually has a great design and fits in the world, the quality of the fights range from at best uninspired and anticlimactic to at worst tedious and poorly designed. There wasn't one that impressed me or that I think back on positively. At best, I'm just neutral. The first boss, a monstrous bulldozer called 100 Hungry Beaks, was fine given that it was the first boss, but it has no interesting mechanics, and the fight is just ramping off the machine's metal blade in front and easily shooting the bird skulls. The machine has very little offensive capabilities and no changes to its behavior at any point, so the fight is incredibly simple. Again, not good, but I'm willing to give it a pass given that it's the first boss. The second boss does not get a pass, however, as it more or less repeats the same style of fight. You ramp off the middle segment of the tree to trigger the creature, this thing called a woodcrawler, to fly across the screen with several enemy bird soldiers hanging off of it firing shots. The creature will only be triggered if you ramp off the center segment, and so you just do that over and over again, picking off the passenger birds, and that's it. The third boss is an interesting encounter design, as it's a giant Frankenstein mole rat that chases you, creating a tense side-scrolling segment as you dodge its attacks and wait for a chance to attack yourself. This encounter would have been made better if you didn't repeat the fight 4 separate times throughout the level, with each becoming increasingly longer. Additionally, because of Laika's one-hit kill system, any death during the chase sequence sends you back to the very beginning, which causes the already overused fight to grow even more tedious. I'm sure you get the point by now, but I want to touch on the other bosses quickly regardless. The enormous crab robot in the lighthouse, I think, is one of the worst bosses I've ever fought in a video game. Like the mole rat boss before it, the crab robot chases you, however this time it's vertically as opposed to horizontally. At specific points, it'll stop and you'll be forced to wait through a slow segment as it releases bubbles and bullets that you avoid. You do this 3 times with acrobatic sections in between. There's too much waiting around in this fight, as well as it's also made worse by the one-shot death mechanic, meaning you start the entire sequence over each time. To fix this problem, the encounter could have used mid-boss checkpoints or checkpoints after each acrobatic section. This isn't done here, and I suspect it's because doing so would expose how shallow and bare bones the fight actually is if you don't have to repeat it in its entirety every single time. It's artificially difficult and feels deliberately designed to waste the player's time. I'd genuinely be interested to hear from the developers about this particular boss fight and what their intentions were. The chicken Pope boss I spoke about earlier was fine, but using the towing mechanic on it never felt right. I'll give it a half point of credit here because it's the only boss fight that even attempts to use the new mechanics the game is introducing, that being the tow, but that alone doesn't make it interesting or good. Finally, we have the game's last boss, the two-headed bird general, which turns out to be the game's greatest letdown. It has the simplest move of any boss outside of possibly the first one. That's singular, by the way. The final boss only has one move, a slow lunge with its beak. It took me 23 seconds to beat this boss after its stage. The floating city took several hours. This is where there's the most room for improvement for a potential sequel or game that utilizes a similar gameplay style. And to be clear, I do hope there is a sequel or spiritual successor coming. As I said at the beginning of this video, the thing I'll remember most about Laika Aged Through Blood is how unique so many parts of it are. If you like more in-depth videos like this, consider checking out the channel, and if you're looking for a way to help out, a like or comment will do the trick, as it helps boost engagement. And with that, thanks for watching.